Hey everybody, it's Andre Shirdan with the EagleSoft Field Guide, and I'm here with a good friend, Leigh Ann Faight, and Leigh Ann's with Upstream Dental Practice Coaching. And you know, I spent a lot of time as a dental practice coach. I haven't done it since 2005, and if there's anyone who I recommend, and everybody knows, I'm like the general contractor of dentistry. People come up to me with questions, and I go, I can't do it, but I have somebody who can get it for you. I'm not a drywall guy, but I can certainly find one that can do it. And she's my drywall guy. She is the person that I call when it comes to practice coaching. And Leah, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I love talking about EagleSoft's my favorite. So whenever I get to combine coaching and talking about my favorite practice management software, it's all I ever use. So I also have a bias.
And we didn't coordinate the white background, black outfit today, but we're doing
yeah,
all right.
I mean, technically we didn't, but this is our jam. I know this is your jam and this is always mine.
That's all I do. So, well, I'm glad you're here. And kind of what we wanted to talk about is, one of my big things in the EagleSoft Field Guide is trying to get people to utilize the software and coming up with tools to utilize the software better. But also there are tools that we brought over from the 1980s and 1990. I mean, nobody's using pegboard anymore. Nobody's using some of the things that we used in charts and that kind of stuff. But one of the things that has lasted, through this transition to paperless is the route sheet, that super bill. And there is a place for it. There's a place for that tool to make that bridge. And I wanted to kind of talk to you because, you're an expert in the sort of the handoff, the patient, the provider, the office. I wanted to talk to you about that and how we can help some of the offices with that transition. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, let's first define what a handoff is, because I think a handoff in our industry can happen in multiple areas. You and I do a handoff whenever I'm working with a practice that is struggling utilizing their software. I'll send an email handoff that'll introduce you to them and connect them, right? And connect some information that I know about them that would be helpful for you to know. Exactly. So when I think about a handoff in the operatory, and a handoff from the clinical team to the front office team, I'm thinking of it really similar. What is information that I gathered from my patient when I was a practicing hygienist, that when my doctor comes in, he and I, in this case, I had a male doctor, he and I have already agreed, he wants to hear me hand off. Okay, so that's the clinical exam handoff, the one that I've completed with my hygiene assessment, that allows me to hand off information with my patient, not about my patient, right? Subject over object. And then the next handoff, I think, is the one that you're talking about, which is where some practices will lean into the route slip information to hand off information that happened in the operatory to the front office team. So that's number one, right? We're talking about from clinical team to front office team.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. So I think I'm gonna hit a couple highlights what I think are really, really critical, and that's number one. The most important thing to think of in terms of a handoff is actually not the route slip. It's who am I talking to, and when I am a hygienist leaving my operatory with my patient, the things that were discussed in the operatory are important for the front office team members to hear. So when I do a handoff up front with my team member, I'm actually talking to my patient. Whenever I do Zooms with teams, I usually have either a water cup or a coffee cup, and I pull it up and pretend like it's my patient, because this is the most important person that I can be speaking to. Yeah. Oftentimes in a handoff, team members take the route slip. They sort of have this narrow field of focus. I'm going up to my front office team member. I'm going to hand the route slip to them. I'm going to tell them what we did today, and then I'm going to leave and say goodbye to my patient. But the handoff up front, whether it's in the presence of a route slip or in the absence of one, which I vote for the absence of one, is done with the patient. It's done in reflection on what we accomplished in the clinical realm with the patient. The front office team member already knows to listen, right? They know when I come up. Maybe we've done a sort of a pre-handoff where I've gone up front and said, I'm going to bring Mary up front. She's on a time crunch. And I've already scheduled her hygiene appointment. But when I bring the patient up front, I think that's the number one thing, is to make sure we maintain in subject, not object.
Love it.
So thinking about why teams use route slips. And so this is where I'll cast the vote to use route slips if these things are a struggle. And I know you have some take on this too. So one, when clinical team members are struggling to use the treatment plan component of EAGLESOFT, where they maybe can't enter the codes, or maybe they're not familiar with how to do a walkout. I just went through this with a team that I'm coaching in Dallas. Their clinical team never even took their treatment to walkout. The front office team did everything. So in that case, this particular team is struggling to use the software, and the route slips are a good crutch or bridge for them to confirm, did I do these things? Is this what we did today? Check it off. And so when I go up front, I hand off the route slip. However, if we're going to go upstream and sort of solve the problem at its source, the source is we don't know how to use the software. And my preference is to go there and teach the clinical team how to put things into the treatment plan, how to have accurate exploding codes so that they can ensure that what they completed today is accurate, and they can also enter future treatment. With the knowledge of that, you really don't need a route slip. It doesn't say anything else on there, in my opinion, in my experience, that's critical. But I want to hear your take on it too.
Well, and for years, I've been trying to get people to transition to computers, and this is the thing. If we run into each other at the mall, the likelihood of me pulling out paper and pencil to get your phone number is truly unlikely. I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to say, hey, why don't you put your number in here, or why don't you text me your information? And we developed this skill when we both started using cell phones. It took us a while to get that thumb thing happening, and maybe we would have gone back to paper. Now, what I find is that most offices use paper the way that some people are addicted to drugs, and they're addicted to it, and they don't want to move away from it for the fear of the pain. And I'm going to use an analogy is, when I look at route sheets, I look at them like methadone. There's an office that's hurting with a process to get themselves happy. And now what they're doing is they're using a bridge to get them through this happiness problem without having the pain of going cold turkey right to the computer. And there's nothing wrong with that. My feeling is we have to find a tool that is not as addictive, but also is helpful to be able to make sure that the process happens. And that could be a very limited, what I have is I have a small 3x5 mini route sheet. Yeah. And it's just to be able to do that communication without losing touch with that personal interaction that you were talking about.
Yeah. Right.
So we get the process, but we don't lose that handoff, which I think is so important,
And I do too. And that makes me think, whether you're going to go cold turkey or you're going to sort of titrate this, I also think it's important to think, what other major projects do we have going on that might complicate our ability to commit to these new habits and the new patterns of using the software differently. And if you have a lot of other things going on, then maybe it makes sense to set a timeline. Okay, we're gonna use this for the next 90 days while we wrap up, whatever integration of some new software or whatever piece of equipment, and then plan a couple team meetings where we're walking through what are the steps and what is the information that we need to know so that we can complete an accurate handoff from clinical team to front office team in the absence of the route slips. Maybe even thinking, all right, what is it on the route slip that we need so much that we could start retraining ourselves and come up with a timeline. I think one of my core values is for Tiff and I is we keep it simple. And I think when you start thinking about changing a process like not using route slips and you've had all this information, if you create a lot of complexities or you have to go cold turkey, you may be more likely, like most human habits and patterns, to kind of just revert and bounce back really fast. So maybe make a couple commitments, maybe make a 30-day commitment that will use it, but will be more subject and less object. And then we'll sort of titrate the route slip away, or we'll maybe move down to your meaty, more condensed route slip to eventually have a timeline where you eliminate it. And I was going to say one other thing about the use of route slips, and that is thinking about, just basically thinking about the pertinent information on there and how can you start to practice verbalizing that information. So we think of it in a simple handoff, an acronym. I know, it's probably been heard before, but think about the things that you want to talk about. What's the most important thing what is the thing that we did today? So the procedure, the other piece, so that's P for procedure. The other P is what is the procedure or next visit going to be? Have we talked about investments? So I know some practices print the treatment plan up front. They take, the next treatment plan, they take it to the back. They initially introduce, and this sort of practices got more comfortable with this post-COVID because we were not taking patients in and out, moving them to consults room. So if you print a treatment plan, have you gone over the investment? And then how much time is the patient going to get scheduled for? So you think of it in an acronym of PIT. I know practices that do a pre-PIT. A pre-PIT would be information that is shared with the front office team member about the procedure, about the investment, or about the time for next visit, just to make it simple and easy to remember. And that information you've got to know before you leave the operatory. You need to know the procedure that was completed today, just in case there's anything to add to the walkout. You need to know the procedure for next time, which takes another skill set to work on in the operatory, which is the handoff with either the hygienist or the assistant to the doctor. So you've got to work on that skill set. You've got to work on, before your doctor leaves the operatory, are you clear on next visit's procedure? Otherwise, you will not have the information to take from the back of the house to the front of the house and do a handoff. And this is I'm lucky enough, and I get to be in lots and lots of practices. And a couple weeks ago, I was down at Pankey, and I would say the number one most desired, biggest pain point for teams and for doctors is our ineffective handoff.
Sure.
So when you said you wanted to talk about this, I was like, oh, well, that's a no-brainer. I mean, it's been top of mind for many years, and coming back from Pankey was just such a prominent conversation and a big pain point. So the other thing that I can recommend, I'm jumping around here, but I want to think about the clinical handoff. So I mentioned in the operatory with the patient, the doctor, and the hygienist or assistant. I think one of the best tips that teams are finding most helpful in ensuring that what happens in the operatory is clear so that I can take it up front and hand it off is coming up with some form of a handoff checklist. The things that your doctor wants covered in the operatory at the time he or she is coming in for the handoff. That seemed to really resonate with teams when we were together down at Pankey, but that just always seems to be such an easy way to create a system that in the operatory, the information that needs discussed and reviewed and clarified with the patient and the doctor, you create it in some form of a checklist. So.
Well, and I like what you did with PIT. And that's what CREW is all about, is these acronyms help us to be able to create processes. CREW is challenge, reflection, energize, and win. So it's, what's the challenge? How do I reflect on that? What's the action to get it done? And then what's the outcome? So anytime we work on something like that, again, if we build this process and say, doctor wants us to do this. It was great when we used intraoral cameras and we had to have those 4 pictures up in the wall on the wall. Right. And there was a process that had to be followed. My doctors wouldn't walk in a room unless those 4 pictures were up. There you go. Exactly. So we have to come up with a process that says, why are we doing all this? Why are we printing all of this information? And it's that classic Seinfeld joke of, why do doctors make you fill out the paperwork if you're not going to read it? if you're going to walk in the room and go, so what are you here for?
And ask all the questions. Yeah.
Exactly. So there has to be a why that we're doing these route sheets. What are we doing to prepare the back? What's the front doing to prepare the back? Because there's a handoff happening there. So there's a lot that's happening that the paper doesn't solve the problem if you don't really look at what the problems are and how do we get to an outcome for.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not being funny when I say this. The paper is really a downstream solution, really, and so if you want to solve this upstream, okay, I'm being a little funny.
I saw you.
But if you want to solve it upstream, then I think tip number one, or maybe my final tip, is sit down around the table together as a team and decide, why have we reverted to route slips? What is it that's important on the route slips? And what is it that we need to articulate that in the absence of the route slips, we could still be effective? The route slips have just become a crutch. They've just become helpful because typically teams don't slow down to really look at these components of the practice and say, how do we improve it? And my final piece would be whatever is discussed or decided. This is often missed. I was with a team last week and they have great conversations about things they want to do different, but they don't document it. And so then when they have these moments where people are scratching their heads and frustrated with each other, it's primarily because people remembered it differently. So don't utilize remembering as a source of clarity. Utilize documentation. I think that's really critical. Write down what you want done. Practice it.
And that leads us back to where we started. One of the things that we work with really well together is the fact that, you say, here are the things that we need to get done. I go, here's what we can do in EagleSoft, and here's what you can do with the people who are using EagleSoft.
Right. Yeah.
And the software can fix some of those things, but a lot of it are going to be people things that need to be fixed at a different level. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm glad you took some time with me to talk about this, because this is one of my everyday problems, and I'm always looking for solutions. So I'm glad. Don't I know it? Well, it's good to talk to you. I'm glad we got some time to do this. So we both got some busy schedules. You're coming off your busy schedule, and I'm getting on the busy schedule. So I'm glad we got a chance to do this.
Thanks, Andre.
Good to see you. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.